everyone! Before we get into the video, I wanted to tell you about the best ways to support the channel. The first thing is free and easy. Make sure to like this video and hit subscribe, share the video with a friend, or even leave a comment to get involved. You can financially support the channel through Patreon or Substack. There's exclusive content like the Chaotic Book Club or Behind the Screens and more. This is also how I pay my bills, so thank you in advance. Now let's get to the video. This is part 2, looking at why people construct a language, their goals, and the questions that arise. Last time we covered artificial alien language experiments in linguistics and Loglan and Lojban, two related languages that are engineered to be logical, precise, and unambiguous. Today, friends, we're dabbling in world peace. It's time to talk about international auxiliary languages. The rise of the nation-state and global political organization in the 1800s necessitated international communication. Rather than pick an existing language for everyone's communication, some people wanted to invent an entirely new language that wouldn't be burdened with the same power imbalances and cultural differences in existing languages. Forcing someone to learn and speak English or Latin or some other language brings with it unsaid judgments that the language in question is somehow better or more preferred than the others. A new international language that is invented explicitly for that purpose is more neutral and preferred. A slew of these languages were proposed over the last 200 years, and each highlight differing views of what is and isn't needed for equitable international cooperation. The first major auxiliary language to have a widespread community was Volapük. It was created by Father Johann Martin Schleyer, a Catholic priest born in 1831 in Baden, Germany. He was ordained when he was 25 and served as a priest for the next 2 decades. Schleyer was a priest at a time of major socio-political upheaval. From 1871 to 1878, the new German Empire was in the throes of the Kulturkampf, a 7-year struggle between the Catholic Church and an increasingly secular national government. The Catholic Church resisted modernization and even began organizing politically within the Center Party. The government squashed that as thoroughly as possible. They passed a series of laws that strictly inhibited the Catholic Church. The Protestants were also caught up, though, because the church-state separation was meant to be extreme and painted with the broadest of brushes. Father Schleyer preached against socialism and argued for the church to maintain control. He was jailed for 4 months in 1875 for breaking the law. After his sentence, he moved on to a second parish. He became interested in international communication after a parishioner struggled to contact his son who had moved to the United States. The Postal Service returned his letters because they didn't understand his writing. Schleyer tried to create a national alphabet that could be used to express the sounds in any language. The alphabet never got any traction, and he started to lose sleep about this problem. In March 1879, he said he heard from God. God said not to despair and to make a new language that everyone around the world could speak. And Schleyer got to work. Though he mostly spoke German, he was already familiar with more than 60 languages. Schleyer primarily based the grammar of Volapük on English, with a mix of German and French added in. If you speak one or any of those languages, you wouldn't necessarily recognize the words, though. They're often so heavily modified, it's next to impossible to see the connections. For example, the word Volapük comes from the English words for world and speak. This was all by design too. He wanted loan words into the language to become unrecognizable so that they lost their ties to the languages and nations they originated from. He published the first sketch of Volapük in 1879 in a Catholic poetry magazine he edited at the time. His book about the language was published the next year in 1880. People were really into the idea of an international language, and Volapük spread like linguistic wildfire. Conventions took place in 1884 in Friedrichshafen, 1887 in Munich, and 1889 in Paris. The first 2 conventions were run in German, but the last conference was conducted entirely in Volapük. By 1889, nearly 1 million people around the world used the language in some capacity. There were 283 language clubs, 25 periodicals in or about the language, and 316 textbooks teaching Volapük in 25 different languages. Volapük and international cooperation was in. There was a major schism in the Volapük community in 1890, which rocked that momentum. At the Second Congress in Munich, the International Volapük Academy was established and run out of Paris in order to help propagate the language. August Kirchhoffs joined Schleyer and 29 other language specialists to work on the grammar and spreading the word. Kirchhoff had published a grammar in 1887 which was fundamentally different from Schleyer's language. While Schleyer wanted to simplify the language, Kirchhoff essentially took over. He removed Schleyer's right of veto within the academy, and it didn't take long for Schleyer to get up and leave and start his own academy in Konstanz called the Volapük Academy. And it didn't last long. He fought any changes to his divinely gifted language, and the academy couldn't sustain itself. It remained largely defunct and ultimately disappeared by 1893. At the same time, the original academy began to make considerable changes in 1892 under the new leadership of an engineer from St. Petersburg named Waldemar Rosenberger. The vocabulary was almost completely replaced to be more like Western European languages, and the grammar was changed to be more familiar to Western Europeans. The changes ultimately mean the language is no longer Volapük. They changed the name to idiom neutral, and the academy became dedicated to its study and propagation instead. They later abandoned idiom neutral in 1908 in favor of Latino sine flexione, a simplified form of Latin developed by Italian mathematician Giuseppe Peano. At roughly the same time, another international auxiliary language named Esperanto was being developed that would overtake Volapük, idiom neutral, and Latino sine flexione. Esperanto was created by a man whose life was largely defined by constantly navigating cultural and linguistic differences. His name is Dr. L.L. Zamenhof, and he's a very cool dude. Even something as his name, however, is complicated by where and when he was born. Zamenhof was born to an Ashkenazi Jewish family in Białystok, now Białystok. At different times in history, Białystok was part of Lithuania, Poland, Prussia, Russia, was occupied German territory during World War I, and it was returned to Poland after the war. The city has always been intensely multicultural and multilingual, with a large Jewish Yiddish-speaking community, Roman Catholic Poles, Eastern Orthodox Russians, Belarusians, Germans, and more. When Zamenhof was born in 1859, the city was majority Jewish and had been in the Russian Empire for about 50 years. Zamenhof's name is an excellent example of Białystok's history. His parents gave him the Hebrew name Eliezer, but his birth certificate records his first name in Yiddish, Lazar. He went by Lazar and the Russian version Lazar through his childhood. His family name comes from the German Zamenhof, but his birth certificate records it as the Russian version spelled with a Z. He also had a Russian family name of Markovich, which translates to son of Mark, on a lot of documents because that was standard for the empire at the time. He'd later add an additional name, Ludovic or Ludwig, at university. This is possibly in honor of an early language inventor named Francis Ludwig, but it seems like we haven't hard confirmed that. Essentially, he took the L's from both first names to be L.L. Zamenhof. Born in 1859, Zamenhof grew up in a time where the world was rapidly growing and changing. The second wave of the Industrial Revolution is in full swing, globalization is making the world smaller and more connected, and Western Europe is catapulting to global superpower status thanks to coal and inventions like the railroad, steamboat, and steam engine. Humanity was off to the races when it came to new inventions and foundation-shattering discoveries. Here is a short list of what happened in science in 1859 alone. Richard Carrington became the first person to observe solar flares and the first recorded solar radiation storm. Marian Albertovich Kowalski published a method about how we can deduce the rotation of the Milky Way galaxy. Charles Darwin published his theory of evolution and on the origin of species. I bet that won't become a big deal or anything. Charles Harrison Blackley identified pollen as the cause of seasonal allergies. I guess before that, we just wondered why the world got yellow and dusty for a large part of the year. John Tyndall figured out that different concentrations of gases could bring about changes in global climate. The Royal Geographical Society of London was founded. Florence Nightingale published her notes on nursing, and Etienne Lenoir produced the first gas-fired internal combustion engine. The world was getting faster, a lot faster. Zamenhof and his family were in a resilient city that had faced war and political upheaval not once, but many times. His father, Mark, was a French and German teacher and linguist who ran a school in the city. This means little Zamenhof grew up speaking Russian, Yiddish, and Polish, the languages of Białystok. He also learned French, German, and Hebrew from his father. His interest in languages would also lead him to later study English, Lithuanian, Spanish, and Italian. So this kid was living a multilingual life in a multicultural city that was plagued by intergroup fighting and difficulty communicating. A wave of anti-Semitism was ramping up across Russia, and the tensions in Białystok ultimately led the family to leave for Warsaw when Zamenhof was 14. he naturally had some thoughts about the fighting happening between different groups. He believed that if there was a neutral way to speak to one another, the entrenched hatred between different groups would melt away. He got to work on what he called lingua universala. Esperanto began in 1878 because a Jewish teenager living under the oppressive thumb of the Russian Empire, aware of suspicious neighbors and surrounded by escalating violence, began a project to see world peace and cooperation. Now, it's a living language with about 2 million users and multiple generations of native speakers, but I'm getting ahead of myself. By the end of high school, Zamenhof had finished his work on his international language and had completed the first descriptive grammar of Yiddish. He didn't immediately publish either, though, because he didn't have the money. Both projects took a back seat as he set out for medical school in Moscow. He was in his second year of studies when Tsar Alexander II was assassinated. Rather immediately, authorities and the press implied rather loudly that it was a Jewish conspiracy. The Russian Empire had historically had a very small Jewish population, but that changed rather dramatically when the empire expanded westward to include the Pale. This area includes the whole or part of 7 of today's countries: Belarus, Lithuania, Moldova, Ukraine, Poland, Latvia, and Western Russia. Home to 40% of the world's Jewish population with about 5 million people, this sudden influx offered the Russian Empire an excellent scapegoat for, well, everything. When the Tsar was assassinated, it killed any hopes of expanded freedom. Instead, a series of pogroms or riots targeted Jewish people across the country, and thousands of Jews were killed. Zamenhof finished his exams and moved back to Warsaw to finish his education there in time to watch the violence sweep through that city. Laws were passed restricting the Jewish population from movement outside of the Pale. You could only earn your right to live outside of the Pale by converting to Russian Orthodox Christianity, pursuing or having a university degree, or being a wealthy merchant. Everyone else was left to their own devices or forced to emigrate elsewhere. So Zamenhof is back in Warsaw studying to be an eye doctor, and there's mass oppression, violence, and his people are fleeing around him. 2 million Jews would flee the Russian Empire between 1880 and 1920, most going to the US and the UK. Zamenhof became an eye doctor and more politically active, joining a predecessor movement of the modern Zionist movement. He was the founding president of the local chapter of Hibat Zion. In 1887, everything kicked off. He left and denounced the Zionist movement, published his book on Esperanto, and began promoting peaceful coexistence between people of different cultures. In a 1901 essay, he argued that the Zionist project could not solve the problems of the Jewish people. In 1914, he said, "I am profoundly convinced that every nationalism offers humanity only the greatest unhappiness. It is true that nationalism of oppressed people, as a natural self-defensive reaction, is much more excusable than the nationalism of people who oppress. But if the nationalism of the strong is ignoble, the nationalism of the weak is imprudent. Both give birth to and support each other." Instead, the Esperanto community was born. Zamenhof, unlike Father Schleyer of Volapük, did not freeze the language or denounce changes to it. He allowed it to grow as a living language and encouraged creating a culture around it. Keeping in touch via letters and periodicals, the number of speakers grew rapidly over the next few decades. It began in the Russian Empire and Central Europe for obvious reasons, but it would spread to other parts of Europe, the Americas, China, and Japan. Ready for a mini Esperanto lesson? We're going to look at the first sentence of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. In English, that's all human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. All nouns end in O in Esperanto, adjectives in A, adverbs in E, and verbs in S. If something is plural, add a J or a Y sound to the end. We'll need present tense, which adds an S to the end of the verb, so we get Ciui homoi estas denaske liberai kai egalai lau digno kai raitoi. That's my Esperanto pronunciation for you. The idea is that it is a pretty straightforward system where you just add suffixes as you need, and different roots of the words tend to be more familiar in different languages. Prior to World War I, a small autonomous territory called Neutral Morisnet between today's Germany and Belgium actually proposed that Esperanto be an official language of the territory. There was a sizable population who used the language there, but the territory was never recognized and formally annexed by Prussia in 1915. The 1920s saw a big boom for the language, though. Iran proposed that the League of Nations adopt the language for international communication. It didn't pass, though, because the French delegate vetoed the action. Gabriel Anatole opposed all recognition of Esperanto because he didn't like that French was losing its status as the international language. Though banned in schools in France, Esperanto became a part of the rest of the League's member states. This also led to organized oppression. In Korea, the language was pushed by socialist thinkers in the 1920s. In 1931, Korea banned all Esperanto education. The community would also be targeted by the Nazis in Germany, Spain under Franco, and the Soviet Union under Stalin. The Nazis used Zamenhof's Jewish heritage as a reason to attack the community. Hitler thought Esperanto was an example of an international Jewish conspiracy to achieve world domination. Zamenhof passed away during World War I, but his family was targeted and killed during the Holocaust because of their ties to Esperanto. Weirdly enough, Mussolini and his fascist Italy were fine with Esperanto because it sounded and looked similar enough to Italian. Despite the oppression, the Esperanto language and movement is very strong today. There are about 2 million speakers of Esperanto and 3 generations of native speakers. It is the most widely spoken constructed language in the world. There is a rich culture out there too. There are more than 25,000 books in Esperanto and several Esperanto magazines. There's a museum dedicated to the language in China, and there are years of world congresses of Esperanto. There's Esperanto music and holidays, and a long-standing tradition of peace, understanding, and social causes. The main criticism of Esperanto is that the language is not neutral enough. The source languages are primarily European, and thus it is seen as biased. It is also accused of being inherently sexist because the default form of nouns is typically the male versions. While not perfect, though, Esperanto has gone further than any other man-made language. In that, I think Zamenhof achieved his goals, and if nothing else, Esperanto has and will pave the way for future auxiliary languages. And there you have it. We invent languages for all types of reasons, from role-playing games to blockbuster movies, from science experiments to international communities dedicated to world peace. You should absolutely check out more. We didn't even get to talk about the medieval language that was based entirely on music notes, or etymology nerds' experiments on TikTok constructing languages in real time. You are wholeheartedly encouraged to dive in and enjoy the wacky world of invented languages. Until next time, friends.